In 1887, on a honeymoon cruise to Scotland, a young conductor named Walter Damrosch happened to strike up a conversation with a fellow passenger, a Scottish-American steel magnate named Andrew Carnegie. Damrosch mentioned, as one does on a honeymoon apparently, that New York's orchestras had nowhere decent to play. Carnegie, who had more money than most small countries and a documented weakness for grand civic gestures, offered to fund a concert hall. Construction began in 1890. The architect was a cellist with no prior experience designing concert halls, and somehow the whole building went up in under a year, financed almost entirely out of Carnegie's own pocket. Nobody involved fully understood why the acoustics turned out as good as they did, since the building predates modern acoustic engineering by decades. It is, structurally speaking, an enormous brick box, uninsulated by steel, and that plain design happens to make sound behave beautifully inside it. Sometimes the most important scientific discovery is stumbling into something that works and deciding not to ask too many questions. The hall opened on May 5, 1891, and the organizers needed a name recognizable enough to make New York look serious to the rest of the musical world, so they paid Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky roughly a year's conductor's salary to cross an ocean and lead his own March Solennelle on opening night. This was Tchaikovsky's only trip to the United States, and his diary from the visit reveals a man who was equal parts thrilled and baffled by the country, jotting down questions about American cigarettes and the safety of the drinking water with the same seriousness he gave to the acoustics of the new hall. The evening itself began with a hymn and an extremely long dedication speech from a bishop, because apparently even the birth of American classical music required someone to test everyone's patience first. When Tchaikovsky finally took the podium, the response was enormous, and he wrote afterward that Americans seemed to know his music better than audiences back home in Russia. He died less than 3 years later, and that single visit remains the only time he ever set foot in the country whose orchestras would go on to perform his work more than almost anywhere else on Earth. 2.5 years after that opening night, Carnegie Hall hosted a premiere that mattered even more to the specific question of what American classical music could sound like. In December 1893, Antonin Dvořák's Symphony No. 9, From the New World, debuted there under conductor Anton Seidl. Dvořák had been lured to New York with a salary many times what he earned as a professor in Prague, hired explicitly to help invent a distinctly American musical voice, and he took the assignment seriously. He absorbed African-American spirituals through his student Harry Burleigh, took in the open landscapes of a trip to Iowa, and folded all of it into a symphony so immediately gripping that the audience broke concert etiquette by applauding after every movement, forcing Dvořák to keep standing up in his box to acknowledge it. That symphony has since become one of the most performed works in the entire repertoire, and it even made it to the moon, quite literally, tucked into Neil Armstrong's belongings during Apollo 11. Not bad for a piece written by a homesick immigrant in a rented room near Union Square. From there, Carnegie Hall simply kept collecting the defining moments of American musical life. Arturo Toscanini held the podium for the better part of 3 decades, at one point leading a benefit concert that raised $10 million for the war effort. In November 1943, a 25-year-old assistant conductor named Leonard Bernstein got a phone call informing him that Bruno Walter had the flu and that he would need to lead the New York Philharmonic that afternoon with no rehearsal. He did. The broadcast made the front page of the New York Times the next morning, and he went on to appear at the hall more than 400 times over the following decades. And the hall wasn't only a shrine to European tradition. In 1938, Benny Goodman brought his swing orchestra onto that same stage, the first time a jazz band played there, and the audience reportedly sat and listened rather than danced, which must have felt strange for a genre built entirely around moving your feet. That night is often credited as the moment jazz crossed over from dancehall entertainment into something the classical establishment had to take seriously, and Carnegie Hall's stamp of approval did a great deal to cement that shift. Judy Garland's 1961 comeback concert there has been called the greatest night in show business history by people who study these things for a living. And even the Beatles played the room in 1964, which means the same stage that once hosted a nervous Russian composer worrying about American water quality eventually hosted a screaming teenage crowd losing its collective mind over 4 young men from Liverpool. None of that history would exist today if not for a violinist named Isaac Stern, because by 1960, Carnegie Hall was scheduled for demolition. The New York Philharmonic was moving to the newly built Lincoln Center. A developer had plans to put an office tower on the site, and city planner Robert Moses saw little reason to save a building he considered architecturally unremarkable.
Stern, who had made his own Carnegie Hall debut in 1943 and considered the place close to a second home, decided that was unacceptable. He organized musicians, assembled a citizens committee, brought in Eleanor Roosevelt, lobbied state legislators, and reframed the entire pitch, arguing that Carnegie Hall could become a center for music education rather than a competitor to Lincoln Center. It worked. In June 1960, the city agreed to purchase the building for $5 million, and Stern became president of the nonprofit formed to run it, a role he held for the rest of his life. At the reopening concert that September, performing Beethoven's Violin Concerto, Stern broke a string on his own instrument in the middle of the performance, apparently overcome by the moment, and the audience gave him a standing ovation anyway. Without that 4-month campaign, none of the rest of this story would have a stage to have happened on.
What makes the hall so enduringly famous isn't just the guest list, extraordinary as it is. It's the acoustics that nobody fully planned for. A design so effective that it became the gold standard. Other halls have spent more than a century trying and mostly failing to replicate. It's the fact that appearing there became, almost by accident, the industry's unofficial seal of approval. The place where a composer, a conductor, or an entire genre got to prove it belonged. And it's the peculiar fact that the hall's survival was never guaranteed, saved not by city planners or corporate donors, but by one performer who refused to let a $5 million demolition schedule win. Carnegie Hall didn't just host the story of classical music arriving in America. In 1960, it very nearly became a footnote in it. And the only reason it didn't is that someone in the audience decided to walk backstage and do something about it.